And I think we should be live. Hello, everyone. Let's wait a minute as we see people rolling in. And if anyone's already watching, I always appreciate it if you want to let us know in the chat that you can hear and see us. It's always good to double check. I know I've had a couple times where my mic got disconnected or something, so I always want to double check. I think I see quite a few people here already. How's it going, everyone? We're going to wait just a minute before we get going. Russ said they can hear us loud and clear. Thank you for letting us know.
All right. More importantly, Sage, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, we're also, as we're waiting to get going, if people want to put in the chat maybe where they're watching from, that's always kind of fun to hear. Where are you watching from, Andre?
I'm watching from a sunny area in West Seattle in Washington State.
Nice. USA?
USA.
I'm also in Seattle, in case anyone else is Seattle-based and wants to say hello. Let me just double-check that we're streaming in all the right places. Looks like we are. Also, if anyone wants to put in the chat a little bit about any maybe machine learning or specifically large language model applications they're either building or anything they're excited about, let us know in the chat. Someone said they're watching from Frankfurt, Germany. Awesome. What time is it over there? Sometimes I'm always surprised where people are watching from and the time it is. People will be like, oh, it's 3 a.m. Someone said St. Petersburg, Florida.
You don't watch workshops at 3 a.m., Sage?
I know sometimes I can't sleep. So actually, I think I have done that before. Someone said St. Petersburg, Florida. I used to live in Melbourne, Florida, if you happen to know where that is. Someone said San Francisco, India, New York. They said it's 7 p.m. in Germany. Not as bad as I thought it might be. And we'll get going here in a minute. I'm just going to wait for people to roll in. While people are joining, I'll share a couple links in the chat as well if you want to go ahead and kind of get the setup process going for you, if you want to follow along. Main thing is you'll probably need to create a WhyLabs account unless you already have one. It's free to sign up. There's no card or anything required, so it's very easy. I think you just might need to verify your email, and that's it. And the other thing is we're going to be using our new open source library called LangKit, and I will share the GitHub in the chat. And definitely give us a star. We always appreciate a GitHub star. We just launched this project, and it's really exciting. So you can check out all the documentation and examples in there. We'll obviously be walking through an example today as well. So I'm going to share a Google Colab link. This is what we're going to be following along during the kind of hands-on portion of this workshop. And then also, if you want to stay connected, there's a Slack group. So if you have any questions about what we cover, maybe you're trying to implement this later on with your own project, that's going to be a really good place to ask those follow-up questions and stay connected with us, but also, with other people in the field. Someone else said, watching from Colombia, San Francisco, Angola. And they also mentioned they're excited now building an LLM app for banking sector. Ooh, that's interesting. What is the app doing? Is it like a support? Is it something else? All right, just wait one more minute and we'll get going. Or 30 more seconds, probably. Awesome to see where everyone's watching from. For the people who just joined, if you want to throw in the YouTube chat where you're watching from, or maybe a little bit about why you're interested in LLMs. If you're working on an interesting project, whether it's actually for work or a side project, let us know. It's always really fascinating to hear what people are building with large language models. Also, the links I shared should be in the YouTube description. So if you need to open up the Colab notebook or anything like that, and you lost the link in the chat, look in the YouTube description. Someone said they're watching from South Africa. Awesome. And I saw a big chunk of people join. Just reiterating, we're going to get started here in a second. And we're just asking people in the chat if you want to share in the chat where you're watching from and maybe any interesting use cases you have around large language models. I'll go ahead and get the slideshow going. Someone said Uruguay and Kenya. Wow, people all over today. This is very exciting.
We truly have a worldwide audience.
I think so. Awesome. And we'll go over the setup links again as well when we get to the hands-on portion. So don't worry too much about opening everything this second if you weren't here at the beginning. All right, let's go ahead and get going through the slides. Andre, are you ready?
I woke up this morning, Sage, and I immediately knew I was ready. So
that's a good sign.
Are you ready?
I think I'm ready. All right, so this is a workshop on monitoring large language models in production. We're going to talk about how to get started doing ML and AI observability on large language models, and we're going to do some quick intros. We'll talk about setup again for anyone who just joined. That we're going to be talking about large language models and some of the pain points that you might experience using them. And then we're going to talk about LangKit, which is our new open source project, and how to monitor LLMs in production with some hands-on examples. We're going to use LangKit, we'll use LangChain, and OpenAI today. So you see several examples to get started with, and hopefully you can take what you learned today and quickly implement it into your use cases. All right, so quick introductions. Andre, would you do the honors of going first?
Absolutely. Hey everyone, Andre Elizondo. Like I said, I'm based in Seattle, Washington. I'm a solutions architect with WhyLabs. We get to work with a lot of new projects around large language models as well as all other kinds of ML. So excited to be talking to you about what we built.
Yep, and I'm Sage Elliott. I'm a technical evangelist here at WhyLabs, and yeah, I'm really excited to also show off our large language model monitoring capabilities. If you're not familiar with WhyLabs, we build tools around AI and ML observability. We have a open source library that's been out for a while called WhyLogs that has a lot of really cool capabilities. Again, you can check that out in the description as well. All right, so setup again for anyone just joined. Again, I saw a lot of people come in, so I'm going to share these one more time in the chat before we get into the meat of the slides here. Oh, and just to mention, so we're going to go through some slides and talk about some of the pain points and set a little baseline understanding on what we're going to implement today. But then we are going to be focusing probably mostly on kind of hands-on today, running everything in a Colab notebook. So. Hopefully you're excited to either see some live examples and take a Colab notebook and run these yourself. All right, and I'm going to share these one more time in the chat. So go check out our library on GitHub. Give us a star. We always appreciate a star. Hopefully you find the project really cool. You'll want to sign up for a free WhyLabs account. Again, there's no card or anything required, so it should be very easy for you to sign up. And a lot of us probably already have an OpenAI account. Not all of the examples in the Colab today are going to use OpenAI, but we are going to show an integration with LangChain and use the GPT from OpenAI. So if you have an API account, that'll be helpful for that section. We'll actually show how to run that whole integration. And then this is going to be the Colab notebook that we're going to run in. And
Sage, the important thing to call out too is for the examples that we're going to be doing, you do need a paid OpenAI API key. So you'll need an API key, but also you need to have some billing defined. Otherwise, they'll give you some rate limiting errors.
Yeah, for one of the examples. So again, if you don't have the paid API key on OpenAI, don't worry. You'll still be able to run through a lot of the examples. But we do have some examples showing the integration with LangChain and OpenAI. And for that, you do need a paid API key. I was able to run it. I used to have some credits in there. I don't know if they still do that when you sign up if you get credits or not. But I did have credits in there at some point, and then now I added a credit card. So yeah, great quick call, Andre. All right, so we've announced LangKit, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. This is WhyLabs language toolkit that makes it pretty easy to start monitoring large language models and language models in general. Large language models, or LLMs, you're likely familiar with probably a lot of them at this point. And I always like to ask in the chat too, like, what are you using right now? Are you interacting mostly with like ChatGPT? Are you building an app with the OpenAI API? Are you using Hugging Face or Dolly or Bing? Andre, what have you been using?
I've been using mainly GPT 3.5 Turbo, but Dolly has been pretty exciting so far. I've been doing some experimentation with Dolly, and then there's just a ton of language models on Hugging Face that I've been using as well. But definitely, I would say 80% of my time is still spent on GPT 3.5 Turbo.
I think mine has been as well. And again, I'd love to hear from the audience. If you're building stuff or even just interacting with it, what is it that you're using right now? I think it'd be kind of a fun data point to see what our audience is building with. And then, of course, we've probably seen a lot of the different applications built with them, such as like agents, chatbots, obviously. Probably, I'm guessing almost everyone, if not everyone at this talk, has probably used a chatbot at some point. Probably, ChatGPT, perhaps Hugging Faces. Some other great use cases like summarization and Q&A. Some common pain points with large language models in production. We probably have all experienced some sort of hallucinations happening. We've had to, figure out how to interact with these large language models, whether that's us as a user prompting them, or perhaps, if we're creating an application, we have to kind of give it a prompt template to start with before other users interact with it. And then also looking at output. So, output can vary quite a bit depending on prompts and setup. These are all kind of things that you might want to be keeping an eye on with your application in production, especially when you have users interacting with them.
And I do want to highlight that one middle point, Sage. Prompt engineering is so powerful with LLMs. It's the main way that you drive the behavior. And a lot of folks that we talk to, it's mainly a qualitative process, right? Like you do some prompt engineering with certain keywords, you try to extract some, certain insights out of the responses, but it's mainly qualitative. And so that's one of the bigger pain points that I've seen as of recent, is just making that truly an engineering type of topic.
Yeah, and people will be changing those prompts over time. And it's interesting. Like, I'd love to hear again from someone in the chat, if you've been doing this, if you've been building some sort of LLM application and having these types of prompts, and you might be changing them over time. How are you like validating that that is improving the experience for your customer, or delivering the results you want? And if you don't know, or you haven't been validating, we'll be talking about that today, which is exciting. Because of all these issues that you can experience with like large language models in production, we made LangKit. So LangKit makes it really easy to set up things like guardrails, evaluate your models, how they're performing, and overall observability over time with your model in production. So things like making sure that people aren't prompting jailbreaks, or that your financial chatbot isn't giving medical advice when it shouldn't be. And then evaluating, comparing how prompts are performing against each other. How, just like we talked about, how your prompt engineering is performing, and perhaps even you have multiple models running, and how do those models compare against each other. And then with observability, like a common thing you might be wanting to measure is sentiment over time, which is actually a use case we're going to go through and implement today. See how we can measure, both our user input prompts, but also our responses from our model. Like, is it giving us the in this case, like we want positive responses and prompts, and how can we kind of see that over time? Same with things like readability. If you want to make sure that your app is giving concise answers and not going a little crazy, those are things you might be wanting to monitor over time. I don't know if Andre, if you had something else you want to throw in or talk about.
No, I think like evaluation is really interesting, because a lot of people start with very large models doing a very specific task, and one of the trends that I think we're going to see more of is going to smaller models, right? And like evaluation becomes really critical to see if those smaller models can actually not only perform the task that you expect it to do, but do that at scale and be able to do that consistently. So things like A/B testing, different models, different prompts, seeing how they're either changing the customer interaction or changing the type of depth of response that you're getting. Like a lot of these cool use cases around evaluation, I think are going to be definitely an interesting area to watch here.
Yeah, I think we're going to see so much of that in the next coming years. Whether a lot of people right now might be building on something like GPT, but at the same time, collecting data to build their own models. And yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to evaluate how those newer models are performing in production versus the pre-built models they've been using. And someone in the chat asked, does LangKit have free accounts? So LangKit itself is an open source library that you can use. We'll see it used various ways in a little bit here. And then you can create a free account in WhyLabs, which is a place where you can write those profiles to. Again, we'll see this in action in a little bit. So there are free accounts in WhyLabs that you can use, but also you can use LangKit kind of on its own in a Python environment. And again, we'll see this in action in a few minutes here, but I just want to quickly mention, LangKit is incredibly easy to use. You just pip install it into your Python environment. This is an example that we're going to go implement today. We'll see several in action today, but I'm really excited to show the LangChain integration. So here we're using LangChain, which if you haven't used it, is a framework that allows you to easily tie together different large language models and different tools around them. So we're integrating with LangChain here. We're calling an OpenAI ChatGPT model, give it a prompt, and then just in these few lines of code, there's barely any code here, we're able to pass through a prompt and also send all those different metrics like we were talking about to measure things like text quality and evaluation to WhyLabs and measure this over time. Here's like a time series view of these profiles being uploaded. In this case, this is looking at sentiment values and then seeing when there's some sort of drastic change and alert gets triggered. So it's really easy. We'll run through this just in a little bit here in our Colab notebook. But just want to show it's really just a few lines of code to get started and implementing LangKit and WhyLabs in your project. So here's like a quick overview of what this might look like in production. You're going to have your large language model, you have your prompts coming in, you have your responses. We're going to be using LangKit to collect different telemetry around those responses and prompts, and then we'll be able to measure for like quality, sentiment, relevance, etc. And just mentioning again, LangKit's open source. It integrates with probably most of the libraries that you're going to be using. You can install it in almost any Python environment, and it's also extendable. So we'll be talking today a lot about the out-of-the-box metrics included with it, but if you have other metrics that you want to include, that's extendable in the library as well.
And I think that's really exciting too. And to call out one question in the chat, it's Apache 2 license. So not only is it open source, it's Apache 2 license. So take that as you may for incorporating it into other projects and things like that. But the extensibility is something that I'm super excited about, Sage. I think when it comes to anything from cost observability, custom internal standards, internal metrics, you need to be able to track about your users, your responses. There's a lot of different things that you can extend on top of the LangKit core, what we have out of the box, which I'm just so excited to see what types of use cases people are going to start building with it pretty soon.
I'm really excited too. So if anyone in the chat or watching right now has exciting use cases, definitely let us know. And again, you can join the Slack channel. So if we don't get to every question, or you don't have a question yet, but you might have one later, or you want to talk about your use case with us in DMs or something like that, you can join our Slack channel, which again, the link is in the description. We lost Andre. I'll wait for him to come back for a minute. And I'll just, while we're waiting for him to come back, quickly cover, if you've used WhyLabs before, you've probably seen this diagram, or if you've been to a previous workshop where we have, you have your pipeline where you're doing your model training, your model prediction. In this case, we're talking about large language models. And then you have some sort of telemetry agent. In this case, it's LangKit. If you've used us before for tabular data, you've probably used WhyLogs before. And then we're going to send that telemetry data to an observability store, in this case, WhyLabs today. And with that, we're going to get these aggregate statistics about our large language models. And we're able to do things like forecast and query on them, and then monitor over time. So again, is there any big drift in our data happening? We'll be able to set automatic kind of detection for those things. And then with that, we can trigger, have reports and dashboards, trigger alerts and notifications, and even trigger workflow. So if you were having some big drastic change in data and you wanted to, relabel data or something like that, you can kick off an annotation job automatically. And with that, that's enough slides, and I think we're ready to go for the hands-on example. So again, links are in the description if you're watching on YouTube, but I will share in the chat as well for anyone watching. Again, you can go ahead and create the WhyLabs account for free, and then we'll be going through this Colab notebook, and I'll give everyone a second to open it up. And I'll also share, we have this in our LangKit documentation as well, kind of a demo org with some data in there already. So if you're just not able to run all the code cells right now, you're watching on your phone or something like that, or just in one screen, you don't want to open up code, you can open up this demo org as well and kind of see all the data and how monitors might work in there. And give me 1 second. I'm going to share these links over in LinkedIn as well. On our LinkedIn stream.
This is the exciting part, Sage. Let's get to the code.
And once you open up that Colab link, one, you can let me know in the chat that it works. I always do a lot of testing, making sure it's shareable, and you can open it incognito, but it's always good, again, to double check. So again, just sharing these over in the places we're streaming. Right, so once you open it up, you should have a notebook that looks like this. This is Google Colab. It's kind of Google's way of hosting a Jupyter notebook, but it also gives us a whole environment to run code in. So once you're here, you want to go to File, Save a Copy and Drive. This is going to give you your very own copy of this notebook, and you'll be able to edit all the text, save it, and run all the code. Hopefully you should have no problems if you save a copy in your drive. And then you can bookmark this original link. So if you ever want to come back to this, again, don't worry about playing with the code and breaking it or anything like that on your own version. You can always come back to this and save another copy to your drive. So I'll give everyone a minute. Open up that link. Again, it should be in the YouTube description, but I also just shared it in the chats. And then also save a copy in Drive. And if one person, at least in the chat, wants to let me know that you opened it up and you saved a copy in Drive, that would be great. We'll be off to a great start. Andre, were you able to open it and save a copy in Drive?
I was. I just didn't want to be the first one to pipe up, but yes, I was successfully able to do it, Sage.
Somebody said they did it. Hooray, thank you. It's always great having conversations with people in the audience. So I always love if you just want to put a remark in there or let me know that something worked. Definitely if it didn't work, let us know as well. All right, so I saved my own copy. Someone else said they have the notebook open. Awesome. Great to hear it. You never know, sharing a collab. It should, like I say, share, and it should always work, but occasionally something goes awry or something gets added to the URL or something like that. So it looks like people are able to open it and save a copy in their drive. I'm zoomed in a little bit here. Yours probably will look a little bit smaller, but just want to make sure that everyone can see this in the chat. They said they also have WhyLabs open. Awesome. And if I recall, I think you've been to other workshops, so you might already have a WhyLabs notebook. All right, so here we have our notebook open, and you can go ahead and click these links as well if you want to create an account here. Let's go ahead and run this first code cell. To run a code cell, you can hit this little play button, or you can hit Shift-Enter, and that'll run the code and move you on to the next cell. So let's pip install the two libraries we're going to be working today with LangKit and LangChain. So for this example, we're going to show measuring some out-of-the-box metrics like we had mentioned. This should just take probably 30 seconds or so to install. And we're going to be showing how we can measure things like text quality, text relevance, and sentiment and toxicity today with LangChain. So again, this should just take 30 seconds or so to install. And then we'll go through a quick example here using LangKit to extract some metrics from our data. Once this is done installing. And this first example, you don't need your OpenAI API key or anything like that. We're just going to look at some example prompts and outputs of our model. So we can run this first code cell here. We're going to import LangKit and the LLM metrics from it. We're import WhyLogs as Y. WhyLogs is our data logging library where we create statistical profiles, and then we can log those to WhyLabs or use them in various ways. So again, this should just take a little bit to install. Right now it's downloading some of the metrics. And this is going to be very similar to the example of if you go to our GitHub and you open up the intro to LangKit notebook. And from here, now we're going to import load chats and show first chat. And we'll initialize load chats. We're going to print how many number of chats there are. So we're basically just getting toy data of, I think this gets, I forget, Andre, is it 50 records?
50 records. And I was going to say, while this is loading, Sage, maybe we should go back up to the previous cell and kind of just talk about what we're doing there. So the exciting thing is with LangKit, besides just installing it, the idea here is there's all these out-of-the-box metrics, and you basically just start using them by either importing them individually, or in this case, we have kind of a wrapper of metrics, this LLM metrics, which will pull in some text statistics, quality metrics, sentiment, toxicity, a few other kind of out-of-the-box things that are documented on the repo there. And so it's a really fast way to get started with just a single line. We get all those out of the box, and then as we'll see in the later cell here, that immediately LangKit will start applying that to the context that we're pulling from the LLM.
Yeah, I think it'll make a lot of sense. Just in this next part, we're going to click this link. It's going to open up an anonymous session in WhyLabs, and we'll see all those metrics being collected from our prompts and responses. So this is going to, you should have, if you ran these code cells, you should have this link to click on. Click on it. It will open up an anonymous session in WhyLabs where we can now see a profile that was generated with all of the text metrics we were talking about. So if you kind of scroll here, you can see like aggregate reading level, automated readability index, etc. A whole bunch of different statistics out of the box that we're collecting. Something really cool is even without knowing exactly what's in here yet, you can click on this show insights box, and we'll get some generated insights around our large language model here. So you can see we have, are there any pattern matching? What's the average sentiment for our both you can see prompt and responses.
Some interesting things there too are things like jailbreaks. So looking at similarity to known jailbreaks, as well as looking for injection scoring, as well as refusals. So like if you're using OpenAI, like most people know here, there's certain instructions. If you violate them, you get your classic, as an AI model, I cannot answer this type of question. And so I think monitoring refusals is also a really interesting starting point for folks that maybe aren't doing any monitoring today at all.
Awesome. And then, so this used, again, this is a super quick example of just generating the out-of-the-box statistics for us. And then you can claim the session in this anonymous session, claim it to your WhyLabs account by clicking this sign up button here. But let's go back to the Colab notebook. Unless, Andre, was there anything else you want to point out here real quick before I move on?
Actually, yeah, sure. Do you want to get out of the insights stage and just to clear it up for everybody, since we're going to see this in a moment here. This is a distribution of all the different prompts that we profiled. So we profiled 50 different prompts. What we did was we extracted the statistics from each one of these metrics, and we created a profile. That profile contains basically the distribution of those values for all those different prompts. So like without having to go through each individual prompt in those 50 prompts, we can do this really fast over a large, either, maybe you're already logging your prompts and responses to like a storage bucket or something like that. Using the same approach, we could just pull it down, do the profiling, and get an immediate result based on that profile of like, what are you normally seeing? And then that'll make some of the stuff that we're doing in the next few minutes here a lot easier to track over time going forward. I think that's just like a really cool feature, is just looking at this over large amounts of scale here.
Yeah, so here we're just looking at an individual profile, but if you did pull up that link to the demo org that I shared before, you can kind of get a quick preview. And again, we'll go through and actually write this in a second as well if you want to follow along with the rest of the code. But you get a view like this in your inputs tab. So instead of looking at the individual profile for that single day, which gives us a lot of insight as well, but we get this kind of neat time series view where you can see if anything's changing drastically over time. So here we can see looking at prompt toxicity, and then here we have an alert that's triggered because we set up a monitor where it changed enough that it in this case it went way up. So we might go, oh, what's going on? Why is our prompt or users becoming more toxic? So I'm going to go back to the notebook. Somebody asked, what is the format that comes out of the LangKit library and can be ingested by other backends than WhyLabs?
Yeah, so what comes out of LangKit is, so LangKit is built on WhyLogs, and WhyLogs creates a profile. It's basically a small protobuf file. You can convert that to a pandas data frame. You can convert that to a JSON blob, and you can really send it anywhere. So it's totally up to you. You can integrate it with other things as well. It's basically a standard format for telemetry. And then in WhyLabs, we just have a way to store, visualize, alert on that telemetry, and we try to make that really easy for you. But you can definitely use it separately and in your notebook locally, or store them for whatever reason.
Yeah, we'll see a little bit further down in the collab, or if you skip ahead, we'll see an example of this and kind of inspect a profile a little bit closer as well. All right, so we're going to move on, though. This is, to me, one of the more really exciting parts, I think, is setting up our LangChain integration and putting in our own prompts and tracking very specifically those text metrics we were just showing off. So in order to generate the profiles with LangChain and being able to store them in WhyLabs, we're just going to get a couple API keys here. So one, this is the one example where we're going to need an OpenAI API key. So again, if you already have one, if you're building applications, you're probably good to go. You can go to your OpenAI account and grab an API key. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for mine. And I'll copy this in. And then I'm going to get a few things from WhyLabs. So if you created your WhyLabs account, you should have something that looks like this. Oops, that's from the demo org. You should have something that looks like this. You won't have these demo projects in there. You might have another kind of starter project. But what I'm going to do is create a new resource. So I want to create a new model that we're going to start logging profiles to. And no matter where you are in the WhyLabs app, you can always go to settings, go to models and data set management, and that's where you can also create a model. So I'm going to title this one workshop, and I'm going to select model type as a large language model. By default, the batch frequency as we write profiles up, they're going to be kind of grouped together in a daily format here. I'm going to hit add this model. So now we have my model workshop, and this is the model ID. So you want to copy this number over. And I'll copy this into my notebook, model ID. Make sure you don't accidentally get any spaces. If you do, delete them. New lines or spaces, we don't want those in our strings here. Then we're going to get our WhyLabs org and our WhyLabs API key, and those are on the same tab. So again, go back to your WhyLabs account, go to access token. It's going to be above here, or up in the tabs over here. And I'll make a new key. I'll call it workshop. Copy over. Someone said too fast for the dataset ID. I'll go through it again in a second here. I'll copy in the WhyLabs API key. And then on this same tab, we have org ID in a couple places. I'm going to copy this over, and I'll replace the org ID placeholder with that as well. So I'll go through this again for anyone who said I was going a little too fast there. Sorry about that. So you're going to have your WhyLabs account. And from this homepage, you can go ahead and hit create resource. Or no matter what page you're at, you can always get to the create resource page by going to the hamburger menu, going to settings, and going to model and dataset management. This will bring you to a tab here And then you can create a new model by typing in the name and hit create model. And then you'll get this model ID off to the side here. So yours will probably be something like 1, 2, or 3, or 0. And you can see I've created quite a few models in this account. So mine's all the way up to model 209. If Andre did it, I don't know, it might be like 1,000 or something like that.
I was going to say, do you have 209 models in production stage? 209 LLMs that are currently
No, but I have created 209 models only in this account too, so quite a bit. Once you get that model ID, again, you can just go to Access Token tab over here, type in a API key name here, and hit Generate, and this will give you the key. Copy this over, and then here you can also copy the organization ID. So I'll give everyone a minute to catch up if they're following along here, and let me know if you need me to go over it again real quick.
Also important to note that that key does go away, so make sure to copy it somewhere where you can put it somewhere you can get it again.
Yep.
As soon as you leave this page.
Or just know that you can generate another one.
That too.
And you can easily revoke them. So after this workshop, I'll revoke this key. Russ, were you able to follow along? Again, I'll give everyone just a couple seconds to catch up and get those API keys. Again, let me know if that doesn't work for some reason for you. I'll go ahead and run these code cells. I don't see any comments saying they weren't able to yet. But again, you can get your OpenAI API key and then just the 3 values from WhyLabs, and we'll be good to go. That's really the only other piece of setup for this notebook. So once you get these in, you should be able to kind of run all the rest of the code cells, hopefully without any errors or anything like that. If you do get an error, by the way, unless it's really specific to something about if you put a space or something in here, the chances are is that you forgot to run a previous code cell. I know I've done that before. Most of the time in a workshop, if something isn't working for someone, it's because they didn't run some sort of previous cell. So just make sure that you are running all the code cells in sequence, and we shouldn't have any errors as we go through. So I'm going to run this. This is going to now set my API keys to a local environment. And then here I'm going to import LangChain callbacks. We're going to use the WhyLabs integration, where we're going to use LangChain to prompt ChatGPT and then write those profiles that we saw before with our new prompts to WhyLabs. I'm also going to import a couple more metrics here into LangKit, specifically sentiment and something called topics. So we'll get a sentiment score that we saw in the previous example that we did. So we'll see how our prompts sentiments are sounding as well as our responses. And then we'll also get a cool little feature of topics to see kind of what topic does that prompt or response fall into. Is it something like asking for support? Is it asking for financial advice, medical advice? And that's an interesting thing to measure over time about how users are using your large language models.
This is a cool example too of something that LangKit is using pretty commonly in a lot of our telemetry, is using smaller models to extract insights from the bigger models. So, GPT 3.5 or GPT 4 is a pretty massive model. We could do things like ask back and things like that. You can also get some telemetry, but it tends to be, relatively slow and expensive, and it's also just something that's a lot harder to predict versus using small models that are focused on just classification, just extraction, just like kind of one specific task is how we can get really accurate telemetry here.
Right. So you can use like a pre-trained BERT model on something to specifically find some sort of insight around the text and then log that as telemetry. Here, we're going to initialize our WhyLabs callback and then initialize our large language model, which again, in this case, is using OpenAI. So it's going to be ChatGPT 3.5. And then here, we're going to generate our responses based on these prompts. So this is just a little list of prompts going into our model, and it's going to give us those responses. And we're going to log the prompts and responses to WhyLabs. So I'll go ahead and run this. And this should just take a few seconds to ping OpenAI. Also, this is really cool. Has anyone used LangChain before? If not, and you start building LLMs, chances are very high, I think, that you will. LangChain is a really great framework for kind of wrapping everything together. And like, look, again, I'm just excited when I look at this because it's like not that much code and we're doing so much with it. We're generating responses with a large language model and logging those for telemetry over time. Someone said they didn't get the API key. So real quick, no matter where you are in WhyLabs, you can always go to settings and go to access token here. Just type in a name for your API key, and you'll get that key generated. All right, so we ran these 3 prompts through OpenAI, and they generated responses. We can see the printouts here. We won't read them in depth, but we can here specifically. I'm saying nice things. So I'm saying I love nature. It's beautiful and amazing. This product is awesome. I really enjoy it. Chatting with you has been a great experience. You specifically, Andre. You're very helpful. So these are all obviously pretty positive sounding. Right, so we got responses back. We won't read them in detail here, but probably chances are, if we are saying these things to ChatGPT, we're probably getting some positive responses back as well. So let's go look into WhyLabs though. So we set up our new project. I called it Workshop. We can see that there's 36 inputs that were written to it, and if I open this up, we go to our project dashboard. This dashboard gets more interesting the more data and profiles we upload. But let's go to that profile tab again. This is what we saw in that quick kind of get started example where we're monitoring the telemetry. And by default, it actually opened up the insights right away here. We'll hide this in a second, but since it's already open, we can see that it's giving us insight around our prompts and our responses, where specifically, I think what's interesting, our mean sentiment score, which is what we really wanted to track in this use case, is 83, so very positive on our prompts, as well as very positive, even more positive on our responses. So we had positive prompts. People are chatting happily with our chatbot or something like that in this use case, and we're also giving positive responses in return, which is exciting. I'm going to hide this, and let's go look specifically at that NLTK sentiment score. So if I scroll down, we can see this prompt sentiment NLTK. Oops, didn't mean to click on it. I wanted to view details. If I click on it, it brings me to that time series view, which we'll look at later. But I want to hit view details here, and this will open up kind of the responses for our profile. And if I hover over this, this gives us the value. We can see all of these prompts in this case, all 3 of them were very positive. So we knew that just from getting the data on the Insights tab. But specifically, we can see where they all 3 landed, all basically in the 80 range. So minimum is 81, and the maximum positivity or sentiment score, and this is 85. So go back to the notebook. Let's run the next code cell. And let's see how this changes our score. So what do you think is going to happen here? I'm saying I hate nature. It's ugly. Whereas my other ones, I said I loved it. It was beautiful. And I said the product is bad. I hate it. And I said chatting with you has been a terrible experience. That would never be the case, Andre, for you. And then I said, I'm terrible at saving money. Can you give me advice? So again, we're sending these prompts to OpenAI, and it's going to be returning the responses, and we'll be logging them to WhyLabs. And we set up a rolling logger by default here with WhyLabs too, so it would write these profiles every few minutes. But we're also calling WhyLabs.flush, which is just automatically pushing the profiles over. So if I open up WhyLabs again, and I'm going to hit refresh here, we can see we actually have a new insight, 5 insights. We'll look at that in a second. But real quick, let's just look at the sentiment again. It just takes a few seconds to load here. Now we can see our distribution is very different than before, whereas it was all in the 80s positive. We now have the minimum is negative 80. So that doesn't sound like a very positive score to me. That's pretty negative. And then, we can see now we have this distribution of our max was 85, and now it's all the way down to negative 80. So we saw that that our users now are starting to interact with our app pretty negatively. And if we were to look at the response score, that would also tell us. So where did that go?
Second page, Sage.
Thank you. If we looked at the response score, we can also see that, when we saw before, it was, I think, all in the 90s range. Whereas now we have some, maybe it's not super toxic because we don't want our large language model to be incredibly negative. But now the minimum is much lower than it used to be because it's probably giving some neutral responses that people are angry. And if we go to this Insight tab, I actually thought this was really interesting. So we have the same insights as we had before. Like we're seeing, big change in sentiment happening here. So there's at least one negative prompt is what it's telling us. But what was really interesting is one pattern from our response included a phone number. And this is something I didn't even know was going to happen. And I found out because this insight got generated. And so if we do look at our prompts and we scroll.
And that pattern metric, just to call out, is also something incredibly customizable. So at first we integrated some kind of default patterns for different PII that you might want to look at in either the prompts or the responses. You get to find your own patterns as an expression, and we can look for keywords. Maybe you are looking for like specific canary tokens or specific things that you don't or do want it talking about or mentioning in the response. So that phone number is just one example of that pattern that comes out of the box, but super customizable.
Yeah, and like the phone number is a really good use case too, because if I do have my model and it's trying to give a phone number, like here, I'm pretty sure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is a fake phone number here. That's not my company phone number, and so it would be weird if my model was giving phone numbers out and they're not mine. So this is cool. Like I said, I didn't think it was going to generate that in this case, and it actually did, and gave me a lot of insight into how this model's even performing, which is pretty interesting. So again, if we go now to this input tab, this is going to give us that kind of time series view that we previewed before. And we can go specifically look at the sentiment value here. And again, this might not look super interesting yet because we're really just looking at one profile. And, it's today's date. We uploaded this profile. If I zoom in, I can kind of see the min-max score that was generated on the sentiment in this case. And we can see those scores that we were looking at on the individual profile. And later, we're going to write kind of backfill the data. So we'll have that time series view like we saw. But just going back to the demo org here, you can see this is like what your data would look like. And you can imagine how you might set up an alert saying if sentiment drops, a certain amount or changes drastically from what we've seen previously, trigger some sort of alert for us to take action. And again, the demo org is linked in the notebook as well. So let's go ahead and close that WhyLabs session. And any questions so far? We're going to go in and use another use case that is not using the OpenAI API key. So I think someone didn't have it or something like that. You'll be able to run this next section, hopefully with no errors without any external API key. So let's go ahead and talk about using LangKit for guardrails locally. So what we can do is, we're collecting all this telemetry in our Python environment here. We can actually run checks on this telemetry before we even send it to something like WhyLabs. So in this case, maybe we want to check for our prompt and see if it's a jailbreak or if it's toxic. And if it is, maybe we don't even want to send that prompt to our model in the first place. And you could also do this for your response as well. Check the response, and if the sentiment is pretty bad, maybe we don't display that response to our users. So here we're gonna do we'll import WhyLabs as Y. And we're going to import the LangKit toxicity. And we're going to set our LLM metrics again. And then here we just have a quick little function where we're just saying, is not toxic. And we're going to pass it a prompt message. And then it's going to profile that prompt, whatever that text is, and then we're going to get that telemetry, like the text quality and all those things that we saw in WhyLabs. And then we're going to run a check on it locally, though. So someone had mentioned how are they stored. We mentioned they're stored in the WhyLogs kind of protobuf format, but you can also change that in this case to a dictionary or something like a pandas data frame. In this case, we're doing a dictionary, and then we're going to do a little check on that data. So here we're getting the column prompt. And then specifically, we're looking at toxicity distribution, and we're going to get the max score from that. And then we're going to do a quick little if statement here. We're saying, is the toxicity above 50%? Return false. If it's below 50%, return true. So we're saying is toxic, false or true, or is not toxic. So if it's not toxic, it would return true. So here we'll pass in just a little text for say, do you like fruit? That doesn't sound very toxic to me. And our model agrees that's a very low number. So it's saying this is not a toxic prompt. We could do something with that number. So here we're saying, you dumb and smell bad. So I excuse the vulgar language, but we're going to see what the toxicity score is on that. And it's, a very high number here. 96% toxic is what our model's saying. So maybe, if we want to check on that number, we don't want to run the response in that case. And here, just tying this all together, using that function built in with LangChain again. We're going to initialize WhyLabs and our LLM again here. And then we're going to pass that prompt through and actually get a response from it. So it wasn't toxic here. Again, we're just checking for that. And if it's true, where it's not toxic, go ahead and run the prompt through the model. Otherwise, say, as a large language model, ... which is probably something we've all seen. And here's the example with the toxic prompt. So it checked it with LangKit locally, and then we decided not to even send that prompt to the model in this case.
So it's a good example, like we were doing, kind of guardrailing from the perspective of allowing or denying an LLM response. But you can also think of it for any of the telemetry that we're capturing, either relevance, quality, sentiment, any of those things. Like maybe you don't want to exactly deny or allow something, but if you see something that's returned by your model that's really low relevance to the prompt that was given to it, maybe you want to log that or store those so you can get an immediate understanding of like, what does my model not really do well at handling, and then maybe introduce some additional data for fine tuning, or however you want to mitigate that. But it's a really good way to cut through the noise, since we're computing these scores really fast, and we can do this over a large period of, or a large number of prompts. So at scale, you can make those decisions on like the 10% of noise that's actually true signal, versus having to look at every single prompt, look at every single group of embeddings, or however you want to look at those without using this method. So it's a great way to be able to make some quick determinations based on that telemetry.
Awesome. And the chat's been a little quiet, so hopefully that just means everything is running incredibly smooth. But I also just call out, does this seem interesting to people? Like, is this a cool use case? Maybe something even you've been looking for, and you've been looking for solutions? Love to hear your feedback in the chat. And also, again, if you join the Slack channel, you can give us feedback there as well. Would love to kind of hear what you think about these use cases and how you might find them valuable. So we have one more example we'll run through here. And what we're going to do is load in a data set from Hugging Face. So this actually just contains a big set of prompts and responses. And this is where we're going to go through, kind of backfill the data into WhyLabs, where we can see an example of how you might set monitors on that kind of time series view. And we're also just going to look at one more example of logging in a little bit of a different way without that LangChain integration. So here, again, we're going to import the LLM metrics from LangKit. It should already be installed because we did that previously. We'll import WhyLogs and pandas. And then we're also just going to quickly do a setting change on pandas, where we're going to look at all the columns so we can actually inspect what a whole LangKit profile looks like. And then we'll look at profiling and writing to WhyLabs, a single example without the LangChain integration here. So we're importing WhyLogs, we're importing the WhyLabs writer. And then also in this case, like I mentioned, we want to backfill data. So we're going to kind of simulate running our model in production for like 7 days here versus just writing a profile by default. The time is going to be the date and time that you write it up. But we can overwrite that. So here we're going to import date time as well and pass through a custom date. So I'll run this code cell. I'll walk through what's going on here. We're initializing our WhyLabs writer. We're basically going through those archive chats that we downloaded. And then we're going to get the next one. And then we're going to profile that the response and the prompt here. And then we're passing in a specific schema to WhyLogs, which is the text metric schema. We'll see what this looks like in a second. We're going to overwrite the date time with the current date here. And then we're just going to write the profile up to WhyLabs. So if I ran this, oops, I think I already ran it, right? I ran it again, so we'll get an extra profile. So we created a profile here. It also got written to WhyLabs. We'll take a look at WhyLabs again in a second. But if you want to look at what the LangKit profile looks like in a pandas data frame, here it is. So we have all those different metrics that we have kind of seen in these columns and rows here. So we have like readability index, etc. And you can take basically any of these values. And like before we did the check in our environment, you could grab any of these here. So let's go down to this last code cell here. We're doing the same thing we did above, except for we're just looping through 10 batches, or sorry, 7 days here. So we're going to simulate running our model in production for 7 days, and then we can look at what it looks like as in a time series view and how we might set up a monitor on it. So here, this can take sometimes like 5 or 7 minutes, depending for some reason on the Colab connection or something. So if you run this, you can come back to WhyLabs in a second or in a few minutes, and it should be done. I'm going to go ahead and go to my account. Let me zoom back out. So I already did this previously. So if I open up this project and I go to that input tab, like we've seen before, let's stick with the sentiment value. So let's look at the time series view for all these, the Hugging Face archive. So we can see here over time, our sentiment's kind of been changing. And in fact, actually, it's interesting. It looks like it goes up a lot, dips back down, and goes up again. This is really cool. It's a great chart to gain insight around how your, in this case, users are kind of prompting your model. Again, you could also be looking at this as a response. And this could be, again, any of those different metrics. We're just using sentiment in this case. So any metric you think would be valuable to track, like how people are interacting with your model or the types of responses your models are generating, you can track here. But again, this is awesome to look at, but maybe if there's a big shift in change, we want to get some sort of automated alert or set up some sort of workflow. And so we can do that by setting up a monitor here in WhyLabs. We can also click this Monitor Manager tab. I'll click this button here. This brings me over to the Monitor Manager tab. You can create a new custom one. You can actually go in and get, really interesting with the monitors that you can configure going into JSON. But let's go ahead and take one of these predefined ones. We have several you can choose from. We're going to take this data drift one and configure it. So what we're going to do really is see, how much is our data shifting over time. And we can open up the settings here. We're going to look at the entire data set. You can segment your data as well. So if you want to look at just specific groups of data and set triggers on those, you can. I'm going to leave this by default, but the lower the number here on Hellinger distance, the amount of data drift that's happening on your data, the lower the number is, the more sensitive you're going to make it. So for example, if we want to be really sensitive to sentiment change, we would change this to 0.3 or something like that. And you might have to tune this monitor to be what you want. And then here we'll be looking at a trailing 7-day window. So you can also set a reference profile. So if you have like known sentiment score that you want to be comparing against, you could do that here. But again, we'll just be looking at our data set kind of in the past 7 days and triggering if there's some sort of big value change. And then here, you can also set up how these notifications work. Like, are you going to get an email? It's very easy to integrate with Slack. And again, if you want to kick off some sort of automated job, you can use something like PagerDuty in here. So let's go ahead and now go back to our input tab. And this monitor is now set up to run on, in this use case, kind of all of these metrics that we're collecting. And we can see that by default, it's going to run every 24 hours. We can preview what this monitor would look like. And we can see it triggered on all of our values here, but specifically just staying with the sentiment score. In this case, we can see that the drift distance was pretty high in this case, over that 0.07 that we had selected. And we got an alert. So we're seeing, something big happened here, or people in this case, they were really happy this day with our model. So maybe we did something good. Prompt refusal similarity. Again, all these different interesting metrics are in here, and you can set up monitors on them. Andre, what's your favorite metric?
My favorite, Sage, is actually the closest topic metric, because it's something that a user can define really easily. So for instance, if you want to just determine how often your LLM is talking about something, out of the box, we have a few like predefined topics: support, finance, medical, education, politics. But you can define kind of any topic that you want, and the underlying model that we're using there is pretty gosh darn good at doing zero-shot classification of different topics. And so you can kind of define your list of topics of what you do and maybe don't expect your LLM to be talking about, or things that maybe you want to ensure it's talking more about versus other things. Like if you have a support bot, maybe you don't want to giving medical advice, or you don't want to giving like some kind of deep legal advice or something like that. That's a really awesome scenario that you could use LangKit for detecting, like not only the changes over time, but maybe the presence of a topic that you didn't expect.
Yeah, maybe people start using your chatbot for something you weren't expecting, and that's actually a really good business use case for you. And that happens all the time with like applications, right? Like you built a game, but people are using it for photo storage. So like you might have been like, oh, I built an awesome chatbot that people love asking financial advice. I didn't even know, like I didn't train it specifically for that, but apparently it's really good. But yeah, this is awesome to give you insight about how users are using your like chatbot in this case. But you could also look at responses, right? So like if your responses varied from now support and they started giving finance advice, maybe maybe you changed your prompt template and it's giving different type of advice now. Awesome. Yeah. And so this will keep running just for a few more minutes if you're running this and you want to go set up that monitor yourself and look at the values. But that's it, all of the code examples. I hope that people were able to follow along. And again, we have resources here to learn way more. So you can go to our LangKit repo and get started with an example there. I'll share these links in the chat, but if you had this notebook, they should be right here for you to click on as well. Andre, anything else you want to bring up before we'll open up for some questions here. And I think I also see Felipe from WhyLabs answering some questions in the chat. And again, if you have more questions later, join the Slack channel because I'm sure some people will.
Also, as a reminder, if you did find this useful and you do have some use cases that you think LangKit could be helpful for, definitely give us that star on GitHub. That's how we were able to track how much people like the repo, how much they're using it, and how much they see value out of it. So would highly recommend, if you like this workshop, give us a star. It really helps us a lot.
Yeah, and somebody said, great session. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And yeah, hopefully you learned something new, interesting. And like Andre said, if you have any interesting use cases you want to share with us, we'd love to hear them for sure. And we would love that GitHub star, like Andre said as well. And I shared the link in the chat. If you want to open that up and give us a star, that'd be great. I'll share one more resource in the chat as well. another web page. So if you want to learn more about kind of what we're working on with large language models and WhyLabs, you can check out that page. And let me get the Slack link one more time as well, because I'm assuming people will have questions later. Someone said if they understood, LangKit sits between model and user.
Correct. That's one way that it could be used, especially if you want to guardrail things. We can also sit as a sidecar where we're just collecting those prompts and responses to create and store the telemetry. So if you're looking at more of the changes over time, the overall views, and kind of extracting those interesting things, it doesn't always have to sit directly in between the user. That's kind of the one of the initial guardrailing use cases, but it can sit completely away from the application as long as you're sending those prompts and responses to either like our container, or if you're running them in a batch job or something like that to generate that telemetry, it can really sit anywhere.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be between the user. Like we had the guardrail example, but that could also just be on the response, like Andre was saying, and maybe you're not even doing something at that moment, but you're classifying data and saving it somewhere for you to use for your retraining. So I like the example of a sidecar, Andre, as well. Someone said, can I share the slides? I think I'll have to move them or make them shareable, but we can share them out in if you registered on Eventbrite, we can do a follow-up email. Otherwise, I can share the slides and I'll add them to the YouTube channel description. So if you want to come back later, check that out. Or if you really want to be sure you get them, you can join that Slack channel I shared and you can DM me. Any other questions from people? Again, you can join the Slack channel and ask questions there. Really appreciate it. And I really appreciate everyone's time for showing up. We had a really good turnout, so it's really exciting to see so many people here and some really good questions from everyone. So again, I hope you learned something from this workshop and hope it was interesting. I know some people said they enjoyed it. Andre, did you enjoy it?
I sure did, Sage. That was great.
All right. Thank you, Andre, for joining as well. And I think we'll go ahead and wrap up the live stream. But again, if you want to stay connected, join the Slack channel, ask questions there, and we'll follow up with you. And I'm going to hit the end broadcast. So thank you again, everyone, for coming. And hopefully I'll talk to some of you later.